but okay. So I don't really know how to say this other than there are still bugs to work out with the harvest, and that's a bit of an understatement. But the rate of technology transfer right now is tremendous. And every month there are more people coming out with more products. There are more of our large scale industries saying, hey, we want to get involved. I've been working up by us with Kaz Equipment, with Empire Tractor, with Clinton Tractor, with all of the major equipment dealers in our region, and they're all excited. They see that people, at first they were a little bit standoffish. They're like, this is going to be just a fad. No one's actually going to grow it. It's not a real agricultural crop. And now they're like, hey, no, we want to get on board. We see that people are actually going to grow this, and we want to be part of this. We want you to be able to get your equipment from us. They're like, oh, wait, you can buy things. So as there are more farmers interested, more true equipment is coming on hand, and less, as my husband's family would say, yakafoots stuff, where you're just taking, some duct tape and some wood and putting something together to fix a problem. There are a couple of main problems. One is that the hemp fiber has a tendency to wrap. And so you need to make sure that when you are driving through your field, there is nothing for the fiber to wrap on. For instance, last year we cut our fiber crop down with a sickle bar mower that worked mostly lovely. There were some issues with that, but it worked pretty well. And then we let it rot in the field, so it started to decompose in the field, which is really important because it's going to return a lot of the potassium to the soil. So I didn't talk about the potassium requirements of hemp. The potassium requirements are almost exactly the same as the nitrogen requirements. It takes a tremendous amount of potassium, and so if you let it decompose in the field a bit, you're returning some of that potassium right away because it's the first nutrient to be returned. Potassium isn't incorporated into any organic molecules. It stays as a potassium ion in living things. And so when all living things die, as soon as the cellular materials are oozed out, right, the potassium is returned. It's a pretty quick rate of return. And so letting the plant rot in the field a little bit is ensuring that you're not going to end up with a potassium deficiency. So we came through with a rotary rake once a week for 3 weeks and just turned it to make sure we're getting even retting. And then we baled it with a round baler. Well, the baler was set up for traditional hay, and so there were a lot of tubes of wires that were sort of hanging down. Well, as you're driving through the field, hemp was getting wrapped on them and just ripped stuff out and did a few $1,000s worth of damage. And so we went to Clinton Tractor and we said, okay, first let's fix this, and two, let's plan better for next year. And they were on board. They said, great, this is all we need to do. We need to say, oh, this is where it was catching, so we need to make sure that this is protected. So harvest equipment, we can use a combine. We just need to make sure that the things that have to be protected are protected. Commonly right now, what's protecting rolling and moving pieces are PVC pipes that are being cut in half and put over rollers. I am an agronomist. I am a soil chemist by trade. I am not an engineer. I like to look at these things and I say, that's really neat. I can't design them. With our combines, some of the problem that's happening is that we need the types of combines that are more like a conveyor belt and less spinning wheels so that we are moving the hemp materials into the combine. We have to be careful with harvesting hemp for grain because it's an indeterminate plant, just like a lot of our tomato plants are, right? So you're going to have some portions of the plant that are ripe and ready for harvest while there are new portions elsewhere, right? And so when that happens, that means we have to look at our crop and say, when's it time to harvest our grain? Because the grain doesn't hang on. And so you get a big windstorm, you get a big rainstorm, and you were ready to harvest, your harvest is now on the ground. So in one of our fields last year, because of the rain, because of the wind, because of the ridiculous fall weather, we harvested in the middle of October instead of in the middle of September. And what was a field that I was estimating based on our measurements should have been giving me somewhere around 800 pounds of grain to the acre was giving me 80. Wow. So you have a harvest window. Right? You don't have a harvest mile. And so it's really important to be able to make that call between there's some of the grain here that's still green and not ready, but if I wait too long, I'm going to lose all here that's hanging on there. So we have to look at the weather, we have to look at the plant development. It's tricky. Personally, my favorite hemp crop is the fiber crop. My favorite hemp crop is a fiber crop for two reasons. One, because I see incredible potential in the fiber crop. I see that it's going to take 5 to 10 years for the fiber industry to really grow to the point where we can have lots of people involved. But it is the crop that fits our time frame, right? So you plant it now. It grows, it grows, it grows. It starts to go into its reproductive phase somewhere around the last week of July, and that's where we're going to come through and harvest, because if the fiber crop gets pollinated, the fiber material degrades. And so you get a coarser fiber instead of a smoother fiber. And so if we're looking at those high quality textile and other high quality fiber uses, you really need to harvest it right around the time when it is going into the reproductive stage. And so that means that you've now cut it somewhere around the last week of July or first week of August. And then we're going to let it rot in the field, right? So then we're going to bale it somewhere around the 3rd to 4th week of August. You now have a month of growing. You now have the ability to cover crop with whatever you want to cover crop with. And so from a soil health perspective, because that's something that's really important to me, I think the fiber crop works just, it is the perfect crop if we're going to choose one from the hemp industry for New York State. It gives us the most options for good farming and for good cover cropping and soil management. But what's everybody growing in New York right now? They're growing CBD hemp. About 75% of all of the hemp licenses right now are for CBD, because that's where the money is. Will it stay that way? I don't think so. But, or at least I hope not, because I'm really excited about fiber hemp. But you know, everyone has to get on board. And there are some really interesting things about harvesting for fiber and for grain and for CBD, because every month there are new companies that are coming on board. There's a company, Bish, and their partner is Hemp Harvest Works, and they have brought some new large-scale equipment onto the market for harvesting CBD hemp. John Deere is working really hard on grain combines. They produce them in Canada. They have not brought them into the United States yet, but they are working on it. It is right on the forefront of their mind now, because they see more people are doing it. And so this harvest is, it's the hardest part right now, but it's also the part that's changing the most quickly. Right, so every week I'm learning of new companies that are getting on board and new people who are trying new things. And the past 4 years have not been like this. This is really exciting for the technology that is the rate of transfer for harvest. And so there are a couple of things that we need to think about when it comes to harvest, right? Do we want to ret in the field or not for our fiber? And that's going to completely depend on who you are selling your fiber to and what kind of equipment they have. Do they need to decorticate unretted fiber, or do they need to decorticate retted fiber? That comes back to the conversations that growers need to have with processors, right? With our grain, we need to look at our timing, and we need to look at access to drying. So the grain is an incredibly high protein grain. It also has a lot of oil in it, right? So we can press the grain for oil, which is a delicious salad oil. It's used in cosmetics, blah, blah, blah. But it has a really high omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acid profile, and that makes it spoil quicker than most other grains. So from harvest, the time it needs to be dried down, you need to get it into the dryer in 4 hours, right? If you don't get it into a dryer in 4 hours, it's starting to rot. You will put your hand in it, and it will be hot. And so you really need to think about that access to drying. Then for CBD, you need to think about, what do you want to spend your money on? Do you want to spend it on equipment that you can use year after year, or do you want to spend it on labor to be doing everything by hand? And then what's your access to drying? Because once you are harvesting the CBD flowers, you need to dry that plant material as well. And so that is a space consideration that people don't always think about. Okay, so these are some of the things that you need to think about when you're planning out, well, which one of these crops am I going to grow, and how do I need to approach them? Okay, who is your buyer and what do they require should be first on the list, because before the seed goes in the ground, you need to know where it's being sold to and what they need you to do to produce the crop that they want most.